And a few of you actually have me in class. Apologies extended. So, you get to take notes in Spanish, and I get to speak in English. This is fun. So last year, this is a picture of the city that was closest to where I was. The city that was closest is the capital city of Honduras. Does anyone know what that is? Capital city of Honduras. Yeah, Tegucigalpa is correct. Which also has, I think it's ranked number 2 in the most dangerous airport to fly into, because you basically have to circle around through the mountains, come around, and then like really short airstrip, and it drops really quickly. It's a lot of fun. Something of a, feels a little bit like a roller coaster when you're landing, and a little bit like a roller coaster when you're taking off too, because they have to clear the mountains. But this is Tegucigalpa. It has a population slightly above 1 million, which is less than Chicago. Actually, I think the entire country's population is less than Chicago. But you'll see close-ups of house pictures and other things. In Tegucigalpa and in much of the country, people are either very wealthy or very poor, and the vast majority are very poor. And by very poor, it means they don't have refrigerators, they don't have running water, they don't have any heat. Now, if we had no heat or air conditioning, well, if we had no heat, air conditioning is miserable, but if we had no heat, we probably wouldn't be able to survive. The coldest temperatures there during the winter, which is actually the transition between rainy and dry season around December, it probably only got down to 50s during the day and about 45 at night. That is in degrees Fahrenheit, since you guys don't really know degrees Celsius. But so Tegucigalpa, capital city. I was actually staying about an hour and a half outside of Tegucigalpa in a little community called Rincon de Dolores, which is Corner of Pain, because that's where the gangs used to take people to kill them, is what the town was named for. It's really close to another town called San Matias, which is slightly larger. But basically, we had to see a picture of the roads. This is an example of the Honduran flag. Anyone have any idea why the flag is the way it is, what it stands for? No? Okay. If we go to the next one, so you guys have talked a little bit about the Declaration of Independence of Central American countries. Have you a little bit? Okay. When they originally, so this is a map of Honduras, when they originally made their Declaration of Independence, which was September 15th, a long time, 1817 was it? Okay. Basically, there were 5 countries that declared independence, which is what the 5 stars are for. And Honduras is a country with ocean to the top, or ocean to the north, and ocean to the south. So their flag is set up. So it is blue on top, representing the water to the north, blue on the bottom, representing the water to the south, and the 5 stars representing the 5 original countries that declared independence. At least that's what I was told last year, so that's what I'm going with. In terms of the country, and we'll talk about the country a little bit more when we talk about the Hurricane Mitch that came through in 1998. But in terms of the country, the capital city is Tegucigalpa. Their other major airport city is San Pedro Sula, which is up to the north. So those 2 cities are basically most of the population. There's an area over here that hardly has any population in it. It's extremely mountainous, difficult to grow anything, and as we'll talk about later, most of the people rely heavily on agriculture to survive. They grow what they eat, or they grow what they eat and then trade extras for other food. So Tegucigalpa is where I was. I was actually up here, still in the pink region, which is Francisco Morazan. Honduras is divided into districts or departments, kind of like we would call states, except it's one giant country. And so the districts, there are 33 actually different districts in there. The main ones are highlighted, but there are 33 different districts in the country, I believe. So I was in Francisco Morazan, so everything had to do with what district you were in. As we go through, or department. So, landscape, it's very mountainous. There are some areas that are rainforest, other areas that are not. They don't have seasons like we have seasons. This could have been taken in the middle of summer, or it could have been taken in the middle of winter. The land looks the same. They have rainy and they have dry. It's rainy from about June to November and dry the rest of the year. And by dry, if you're in the mountains, you can get localized storms, and almost everything is in the mountains. But for the most part, you have arid land. They have issues with fires around so right around this time, around March and April, they have issues with fires because many of the regions haven't gotten a lot of rain since November. Up in the mountains, pine is the main tree that you will see, so there's a lot of pine. You can also see banana trees at some areas, but primarily a pine forest, especially the region that I was, because we were pretty high up. I was over a mile in altitude where I was living. Again, vastly different from here. In terms of that, some of the difficulties with pine trees, they don't have a great root system, especially up in the mountains, and they have a tendency to fall over. In the year I was there, there were 3 houses I knew that were hit by trees when they fell, and just taken out. So fortunately, no one was in any of those houses. In one case, the house had to be completely rebuilt. In the other 2 cases, they had a little, I would say a little more than minor damage, but they were still able to live in the house while it was being rebuilt. But some of the issues, especially during some of the flash storms that come through, there are some difficulties with that. In terms of agriculture, bananas. So this is a stalk of bananas that one of the guys on the ranch cut for me and my house, and this is our screened-in porch. We just hung it in the screened-in porch and took them off as they ripened. You had to be careful when you were taking. I don't have a picture of the spider that was on one of them, but there was a spider about that, literally that big, on one of the bananas when we were going to take it, at which point Nikki refused to touch them. But there was a giant spider on one of the bananas at one point. But bananas, fruit, other fruit, avocados are grown there. There's another picture I have here. This is black raspberries. They call moras. Actually, I think blackberries. They call moras. They're huge, and they were there for the picking as opposed to paying like $5 a pound at the store. So fruit and produce are huge in terms of what they eat because it's what they have. And if one family grows corn and another family grows tomatoes, oftentimes they swap. It's not a matter of selling. They all live in a community out together. Many of them, there are some of them, we lived an hour and a half drive from the city depending on the weather. And there were a number of them that had never been to the city before, had never been to Tegucigalpa, needed no reason to go in because their entire life is lived in the same area with the same people and they support each other. It's a feel of community that because we can get so many places so easily, we often don't have. Chickens. Okay, so this is Hulu. He was one of my students. And during one of their classes, they learned how to kill, pluck, and cook a chicken. So this was the chicken we nicknamed Betsy. And we had her living around our house for a little bit. And then she was killed and subsequently dumped in boiling water, which helps with removal of the feathers. And she was then gutted and then cooked and became someone's dinner that night. So one of the animals that you will see everywhere are chickens, and the joke, why did the chicken cross the road? Because it wanted to. Okay, literally we would be driving Besitos, you'll see a picture of a Besito later. We were driving Besitos down the road, and literally a mother hen would lead her chicks across the road 3 feet in front of us. So we're slamming on the brakes to try not to hit the chickens because they are the livelihood of the people who own them. Whether it's for eggs or whether it's for meat. Sometimes it's for both. But in terms of that, killing chickens, totally normal thing. This is Cafeteria de las Delicias. It's called a pulperia, which is basically kind of like a corner market. There are some larger grocery stores, but for the most part, especially outside of the city or even in the city, most people don't shop at the large grocery stores. The large grocery stores are for people who have a lot of money, because they can go and spend a week's worth of groceries or buy a week's worth of groceries. Most people are only buying enough for today, or maybe today and tomorrow. So they go to these pulperias, and you can purchase breads there, you can purchase snacks. Much of Honduras, instead of drinking a lot of water, because the water there is not good, the water you get out of the tap, like you turn on the faucet, if they have running water, you turn on the faucet, you don't want to drink that. It will make you very sick. So I spent a year drinking bottled water. But in terms of that, because the water is bad, and bottled water is more expensive than pop, the most common drink that you would see people drinking is Coke. Because you can get a 3-liter bottle of Coke for about what it costs for a ½ liter of water. And so when they're trying to come up with, and I had a student ask me very sincerely, he was going to live, like he was graduated and going to be living on his own in the city, and he asked in terms of nutrition, what should he be eating? And I said, you need to make sure that you drink enough water. And he was like, does Sprite count? And he was being completely serious, 18-year-old kid, does Sprite count? Because in that culture, pop is so prevalent, and we call it pop, they call it soda. But pop is so prevalent that to him, just the idea of actually drinking water as a necessity, you know, well, Sprite looks the same, doesn't it count? And explaining to them sometimes that no, it doesn't. Here's a little boy, Brian, who I met, and this is, picture is twofold. First of all, and I'm going to show you a picture of his house later, but very typical Honduran family. They had 3 kids, mother, father, 3 kids. This was during the summer, but in terms of their stuff, half their stuff was outside. So they had furniture, there was like a back half shaded in porch. They had furniture back there. They had other building materials they were trying to add on to their house, and we actually put a concrete floor in for them. But they had a couple chickens that were free to run around and christen the new concrete floor that we put in. But yeah, and they were an okay family in terms of financially speaking, because the oldest of their children was able to continue past 6th grade. Education in Honduras ends after 6th grade. So if you graduate from 6th grade, you're set. As far as the government is concerned, you have the mandated education. In the States, it ends after high school. You have to pay to go to college, but it ends after high school. For them, it ends after 6th grade, so if they're sending their child to school past 6th grade, they have to pay. So the fact that they had a daughter who was attending secondary school, they call it secundaria, they had a daughter who was attending secondary school means that they had the means and felt it was important for her to continue. I don't know which form she was in, but... Okay, restaurants. First of all, bottled drinks, glass bottles that they reuse. So most of the time, if I got a drink in a glass bottle, I would use a straw rather than drinking directly from the bottle, because those do get reused. But typical half inside, half outside restaurant, you sometimes will be walking through areas where it's open to the sky. It's not like one enclosed building all the time. But this was a place where we would go often for pupusas. I hear you got pupusas yesterday and experienced what that was. Now, in terms of cost of pupusas here versus there, it was much cheaper there. They're everywhere. You can get them sold on the corner market or whatever. They're very, very common down there. You'll see people with a giant fry plate making them almost everywhere you walk. So that's an example of a restaurant, and they had other things. One of the things at the restaurants that you could get, or another typical Honduran dish, was called mondongo soup, which is intestine soup. I did not try that. I tried tapata, which is similar in spices, but it doesn't have the intestine. I wasn't really a huge fan of intestine, I'm sorry. Intestine and soup, I think they were pig intestine, but okay. This is what coffee looks like. This is shade-grown coffee, so the coffee plants are down here. This is actually the compound I was living on. We called it the ranch. So coffee plants right here, and then they grew it in the shade because it tends to have a richer flavor there. I didn't get a picture of the coffee up close, but the coffee is actually the seed of a fruit. So the fruit, the berry, when it's ripe, is dark red. And then they will basically mash all the fruit, remove the pulp, take the seeds, and they lay out racks. You can see the racks piled up here, but they lay out racks and you dry them in the sun until they have a low enough moisture to roast. So the process itself, from picking to drying to roasting, takes anywhere, depending on how many laborers you have working, takes anywhere from a week to sometimes a month to get from the plant, off the plant, dried, packaged up, roasted, ground, whatever. And I actually brought back about 10 pounds of coffee. It's really good coffee. I'm over halfway through it. It's a sad story. But in terms of that, now coffee down there, buying coffee at the supermarket is super cheap. Here, I think it's anywhere from $10 about a pound, I think. I haven't actually purchased coffee up here in a really long time, so I forget. Down there you could get flavored coffee, expensive flavored coffee for like $6 a pound. So regular coffee was like $1 a pound, which It's another crop that they're known for, and something that everyone drinks, including babies. You will see baby bottles filled with coffee. Instead of giving babies milk or juice, you will see baby bottles filled with coffee. They are weaned on coffee. It would be totally normal for my kindergartners to come to school in the morning already having had 2 cups of coffee. If you've ever been around kindergartners, they don't need that much extra energy. There were times where I had one student, Julio, you actually saw the picture of him holding the chicken. I would make him run for 5 minutes before class because he couldn't sit still. Can't do that in here. They frown on running in the hallways, much less running outside. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit about the region. Let's talk about natural disasters. One of the things that Honduras is prone to is hurricanes. There was actually a hurricane that was approaching when I was down there. Fortunately for us, it made landfall in Guatemala as opposed to in Honduras, so we just got a lot of rain as opposed to getting devastated by a hurricane. But Hurricane Mitch in 1998 came through, and first of all, estimates of death toll are anything from 8,000 to 15,000 people. It smashed through both San Pedro Sula and Tegucigalpa. This is a picture of, there's a river that runs through Tegucigalpa. Most major cities, I'm guessing in Central America, I know in Honduras, most major cities are actually built up around waterways because they needed some source of water and potentially transportation. So the city of Tegucigalpa has this large river running through it. The river reached flood stage, I think it was about 25 feet above normal level, which pretty much any houses in that river valley were completely, if not flooded, were wiped away. There was a family, and often, like some of the families you meet, they will tell you a name. Other families are just kind of known by where they live. So we called them the Stadium family. We don't actually know their name, but there was a family that used to live down by the stadium. There's a giant stadium, and they lost their house in the flood, and as they were going through things, they actually were given permission by the government to set up housing underneath a bridge, like in an enclosed concrete section underneath a bridge. And they felt incredibly blessed because now they had a solid roof over their head that would not wash away if another hurricane came in. So you'll see a picture of some of the houses. I'm showing you the poorer side, which is probably 70-ish. I'm guessing on that, but about 70-ish% of the population lives in houses like these. But in terms of what that looks like, first of all, that's the bridge to cross the river. Now, this is a very low point of the river, but that's the bridge that they used to cross the river to get from one side to another. It is wider than it looks in the picture. It was probably about 10 feet across, I think. In actuality, the picture was taken a little further up, but that's the bridge. So you have a kid that's going to cross the river. Tops of the houses, so this is looking at, first of all, house density. They're very, very close together, right on top of each other. In terms of the roofs, it's common to see things holding down the corrugated metal on the roofs to keep them from blowing away. In terms of the sides of the house, you have concrete, you have wood slabs, so these are some concrete houses. You look at, most people in America look at this and say, I can't believe they live that way. To them, this is pretty decent housing. Other styles of housing. So this is a wood slab. This is actually the house that we put the concrete floor in. So this was little Brian holding the chicken. This is where he lived. So basically you have slats on the outside, and then they'll put up a tablecloth or something on the inside to keep the wind out. If they have concrete floor, it's great because it prevents bugs from coming up. It prevents the floor from getting super muddy. If they don't, they have a dirt floor that they sweep out. Literally sweep a dirt floor, which in some cases doesn't do much more than stir up dust. But again, another picture, you can see some of the plastic that they'll use to try to prevent it. Here's a picture of another house where we did a concrete floor. So the previous house was the concrete floor was last summer. This one was a few years ago. I lived there for a year. I've been down there like 4 or 5 times in addition to that. But this is actually mixing concrete, so you can see the inside of the house, mixing concrete, using shovels. It's fun. So that's the lower side of housing. This is typical good house construction. It's either cement block or just cement walls. Corrugated metal still. This is actually the house that I lived in, so my room was right here. This is the VID000 that I was talking about. It's basically a 15-passenger van stuffed into a 12-passenger body. They're not legal in the US because they don't have seat belts anywhere except for the front seats, which is fairly typical. I don't have pictures of driving in the city down there, but if you picture your worst Chicago driving nightmare, that's basically every day. Inside of the house, now again, we had a really nice house. We had a stove, we had a refrigerator, we had a hot water heater. Those are luxuries. Those aren't standard, those are luxuries. So having those, there were some houses that had hot water heaters that literally were an electric thing that got plugged in right by the shower head, which electric right by shower head. There was something in me that kind of cringed at that. But for that, again, those tend to be luxuries down there. So the fact that the coffee maker, stove, electricity, old school TV, all of that, very, very nice. And we also had a generator, so if the electricity kicks off for any more than an hour, which happened at least once a week, the generator could kick back in. In terms of the infrastructure on these, and by governmental infrastructure, I mean, so if something happens, how long it takes people to respond. If you're in the city, it may get taken care of that day. If you're out, I think the longest we went without electricity was like a week and a half when I was down there, because we were out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, next one. Oh, it stopped responding. Maybe it'll catch up. The next one is a picture of the school, which some of you may be able to see on my laptop. I don't know if the projector is ever going to decide to like me again. But the next one is a picture of the school. Let's see. If I mute, come back. Yeah, there we go. It's a picture of my school. So this was K through 12. Again, typical concrete construction, corrugated metal roof. And this is actually a picture taken from my house, so that's far I had to walk, which isn't all that far. Inside the classroom, I had a maximum of, I think it was 4 students at a time in my class. So if you picture really small classes, which means A, you can't hide, and B, the teacher knows exactly what you did and what you didn't do when it comes to homework. It's not frantically finishing it as she walks around to check. But this was actually the science lab and the classroom all rolled into one. Here are some of my students. That's Johanna, Fonnie, and Franklin. Not that I expect you to remember their names. The fun flowers in the back. Okay, tropical flowers everywhere. It's gorgeous. If you like that sort of thing, which I do. Doing science experiments. Yes, they still have to wear goggles. She was actually burning the dollar bill without actually having it burn up, which isn't a trick I show my students this year. But. Okay, another student. Again, that's Marios. Okay, it's Daisy. Just some pictures of kids because they're cute. We have Valeria and Jolibeth. There we go. So this is now, here in schools, you learn Spanish, or you have the option of taking Spanish. For most of them, if they want to learn English, they have to do it outside of their normal school day, or they have to pay to go to a private school that teaches it. So this was a group of kids that we were tutoring for a little bit in English. They start learning English. I think their ages range. The youngest one was 5 and the oldest one was 13. So it's a mixed age class of let's start talking English. So this was a group that we were working with for a couple days. Another thing with school, uniforms are totally standard. To attend school, you must have the uniform. There are students who do not attend school because they do not have a uniform. They cannot afford a uniform. Uniforms are totally standard when it comes to school. Now, with them, this was actually a celebration day. Honduras has a lot of different holidays and days that we haven't heard of. So this was Dia del Niño, which is Day of the Child. So the entire morning was just a celebration of, and for them it turned into a celebration of English. But Dia del Niño, they have Dia de la Mujer, so Day of the Woman, in addition to a Mother's Day. They also have, I'm not sure if the guys get a day. I forget. I don't think guys get a day. They have Day of the Woman, they have Mother's Day, they have Father's Day, they have a Grandparents' Day, they have a Day of the Teacher, which we got off, which was wonderful. But in terms of that, another thing they have is they do have Dia de Independencia. They celebrate the Day of Independence on September 15th. They also celebrate the day the documents were delivered to Honduras, which is later in the month. So what it turns into is much of the month of September is celebration. I think we had one normal week of school that month. And then everything else you had, 4 normal days and a little festival here. But one of the things they do for Independence Day is they do India Bonita, or Indio Bonito, which is where the students dress up in typical or traditional Indian garb, and there's a contest in terms of who wins, who has the most traditional, and evidently some of the boys got in there just because they're not dressed up, they just wanted in the picture. So you have various costumes. Usually it's the girls that dress up, but sometimes the guys do too. So, pictures of that. He was really cute. More pictures. And then there's a parade. Now, in terms of the parades in the city, in Tegucigalpa, they had a parade. The elementary school parade was the first weekend in September. Then the high school parade was the second weekend in September. And they literally shut down a section of road in the city, a major road, to have this parade. So if you're driving into the city, you may be waiting for literally 3 hours on the highway, waiting for them to clear. Fortunately, we knew side roads. But then after our little processional, every year they do an explanation of the background, what happened, who did what. There's a skit, there's presentations. Their entire culture is very concerned with remembering the past. To graduate from 6th grade, they don't care how much math you know. They care about how much culture you know. Do you know the history? Can you sing and direct the national anthem? Do you know the pledge to the flag? And so with all of that, it's very much culture, culture, culture. So if you go into secondary, if you go into high school, then they'll hammer home the math, the science, the reading, the writing, that sort of thing. But to graduate from 6th grade, they care that you know their culture, their history. They don't want to lose it. And so we have celebrations and singing and festivals. I had to take a picture of the chicken. But random wildlife, so this is Betsy. She was on a hammock. Random wildlife that you will see, you have chickens, mice, it's a little baby mouse. Random wildlife, aka cows on the side of the road, or horses on the side of the road. They're not in fenced-in corrals, they're wandering wherever, and their owners usually know where they are. Parks or other areas, so this is kind of faded, but it basically says you can't play ball here. So parks or other areas, there are many parks, some of them are small, some of them are larger. There's actually an area, so this is a rebuilt, it's like a mock Aztec ruin. This isn't actually the real Aztec ruins, but they did take a park and create kind of a little, not necessarily sure shrine is the right word, but a memorial to the Aztecs here. That hill in the middle here, this is a park. So I picked that picture because that giant hill in the middle is a national park in the middle of Tegucigalpa, which at night, this is a picture of the city at night. This black area right here is that park. There's no electricity, no lights or anything else. And again, a picture can't really do this justice, but you can kind of see that section there. Also, they do not necessarily have protected areas as much in the mountains. However, if you are building new buildings, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get permissions. And if you cut down a tree, you have to get permissions to cut down. Now, if a tree falls, it falls. But if you are actually intentionally removing a tree, you have to get special permissions and often pay a lot of money to various people for the ability to cut down a tree. So they're very concerned about deforestation and other issues there. And this is where I was living. We were up in the middle of the rainforest. The roads getting in and out, the ones in the city are fairly well paved, mostly. These are the roads that we got to take. So slow driving, literally 20 miles an hour was going too fast in some cases. And oh, by the way, if there's a river, the bridge is for people, not for cars. So you are actually driving through the river, which meant that some weeks when during the rainy season, it was actually too high to do anything. You couldn't actually drive through it. It didn't happen. Any questions? That's my information. Any questions from you guys? Español or inglés? Está bien.
Was it really hot in the houses because the roofs were metal?
The roofs were metal. There were a lot of windows, first of all, some of which didn't close. Where I was, the high elevation, I was over a mile in elevation, so normally during the day it was 75, 80, it wasn't too bad. In the city, yes, it would be very hot in houses, so you usually don't have people who stay inside all that much. Other questions? Preguntas, alguien más? Algo más? Sí.
What happens if you can't like drive through the river and you have to go to work or something?
You don't get to work, you walk. There are a few different, the one river we saw there, if you could go an hour out of your way, you could find another way to get to the city, taking other back dirt roads to get into another branch that went in. But oftentimes, if it's raining to the point, like we have snow days, if it was too wet, they couldn't come in. Our ranch did have a tractor that could pull vehicles across that, which we did use on occasion for the teachers as they were coming in from the city out to we had 4 teachers who came in every day from Tegucigalpa out to the city, so driving an hour and a half to commute to work, and we could get them across, but in many cases they just didn't come.
Hay tantos países que necesitan ayuda de personas diferentes. ¿Por qué escogiste a Honduras y vivir allá por un año?
Okay, sorry. Back up slower. I caught the first part and then I stopped.
Hay muchos países que necesitan ayuda en el mundo. ¿Y por qué Honduras? ¿Por qué?
Oh, ¿por qué mí?
Sí.
I had been, so the reason why I picked Honduras is I had been there, my church does missions trips down there, and so I'd been there 4 times before this, and just had seen the need, had gone to the orphanage that I was in an orphanage that I was teaching at, had met the people there, and I just really felt called to go back, and so I did. But yes, there are many, many countries, any countries around there, many countries out in Asia, or in Africa where they desperately need people, and so because I had been there, I definitely had a heart for Honduras. Network error. Okay, because I had been there, I definitely had a heart for Honduras, and so that's why I chose to go there. But yeah, there are a lot of places. Yeah.
If a teacher like couldn't get to work because of the water, would there like subs that would take place if they would here, or would the kids just not at school?
Not really. Oftentimes the kids would just have recess then, or they would sit, like there were times where I had extra kids sitting in the back of my classroom just so they had supervision. But yeah, those classes didn't run. They didn't really do subs. Also, if the teachers couldn't make it in, they didn't get paid. So some of them were a little more desperate than others to come and go work. Anything else?
How long were the school days?
School days, my school days ran 8 to 3:45. And then, that's another thing. Elementary school has our normal year. Secondary is more like a college idea, and they run January through November. So they start their year in January and they graduate in November. But school days were typical length school days, provided the teachers weren't on strike, but that's another whole political mess. Other questions?